Hey everyone, I'm Ken Harlan, Paul Gelb. Paul, how long have we known each other for?
Probably a decade plus.
Right? Crazy. So you've had a lot of different roles that you've had. So I think before we jump into this, I mean, you've been vendor side, brand side, agency side, et cetera, back and forth. Can you give a little background?
Sure. So I have what they call a non-linear career path. So I've been everywhere but the brand side before joining Bayer at the end of 2017. One of the advantages of that is sitting next to the people that build the platforms and the software that drive the vast majority of advertising today, and understanding all the rules and data inputs that they put in place. It's been a huge advantage now being the actual ad buyer at Bayer, because I now know the rules that our ad spend goes through and dictates that. And it's allowed us to build a very technical in-house ad buying team that's now executing across 20 plus ad buying platforms for all 14 of our major brands. And it's become a pretty large team within Bayer and driving the business.
So before we came today, I looked at my LinkedIn connections. You were one of the first 100 connections that I had. So going back a long ways. And one thing I realized today is I look at you and me and I look at our pictures. I don't think we've ever changed them. So we need some AI to help us personalize our LinkedIn profiles better, right? Awesome. So Paul, let's divide this up and get a little, what your take is. Let's first, I think a little easier is what does personalization mean to you? And then the second question will be, what does AI mean? And that's a whole nother. So let's just talk about personalization first.
I think AI might be easier than personalization. So for us, personalization is an engagement or interaction or touch point with a consumer that is unique to that person and their context and environment at the time. Now, we also have customization, which is a little bit less of one-to-one, where you're grouping people together and providing still a shared and similar experience for different groups of people. And so it's just, for us, personalization is that very nitty-gritty vision of one-to-one and having each interaction be unique.
Okay, and then AI, artificial intelligence. I know when people have asked me or they try to describe what artificial intelligence is, I'm like, wait, that just sounds like we're rebranding it with the initials AI, and it was something you might do through software in some way. But what does artificial intelligence mean to you?
I mean, for me as a marketer, I think artificial intelligence is probably the most transparent and honest naming of something that we have in the industry. It's artificial. It's not real intelligence. And I think it speaks to the challenges and the approach that you should be taking to leverage it. It's supposed to replicate and appear almost, in some cases, like a parlor trick, to be like a human, but not to confuse it with being smart enough to be successful and execute on its own, which I think is a much better way to look at it than to sort of fix all. At home, I've gone through different phases of buzzwords with my kids, where if I don't know the answer, I'll either say like Web3 or AI and walk out of the room, and they don't know what that is and look confused at each other, but it gets me out of the situation. But overall, I think when we look at it at AI, it really is just a decision engine and a group of rules based on data inputs and signals that you get.
Speaking of kids, I have a funny story. Last night, my youngest daughter, she was running out of storage on her device, and I said, so I'm going to hit this button. I'm going to just send all your pictures to the cloud. And she started crying. She thought she was losing them. So in terms of artificial intelligence. But, okay, so you come from a unique perspective, right? I mean, MetLife, we just heard, obviously they have certain information on consumers, and there's a balancing act. But when it comes to AI or personalization or both, whichever one you want to talk about, you're obviously at Bayer. Bayer has over-the-counter medication and prescription medication. Both are very large businesses for Bayer. By the way, congratulations. It seems like business continues to boom for Bayer. But when it comes to AI and personalization from a pharma / over-the-counter or all of the above kind of company, how's it different, right, from compared to other industries, right? You've been in other industries, you've been at agencies, you've been vendor side, you've served all the industries. How's it different?
So at working at Bayer, I have the privilege of working towards their larger mission, which is serving the underserved and improving health outcomes, particularly in communities and areas of the world where there's a huge disparity in those health outcomes. So whatever I try to do, I have that in mind on the key to being successful and how we make decisions and what we do and what we don't do. So when I look at AI, I'll ask a few questions to the audience. You could raise your hand. How many people have been in a car and the voice feature of the GPS completely butchered a Spanish street name? How many people here intended to write the word duck in a text message? D-U-C-K. Not anybody. How many people here have been or have seen someone who's a person of color try and do face recognition? Not so good. So we understand that there are huge challenges to doing this well and executing. And for us, when we look at it, it's two major things. One is the data inputs. And so this is bad data. I mean, how many people here have made a decision on and presented data and analysis where the data was completely wrong, dirty, and you had to redo it and pivot and may have been embarrassed? Everyone has had that sort of situation. We have the added complexity being a OTC that's similar to other CPGs where we don't own the point of sale, and there's a lot of data points that we don't have or that we don't get in a timely, actionable manner. And so we have to work around that, understand that, as well as what is accurate data and what is not, because if garbage in, garbage out is the old story. The second thing is the rules that you create. The movies, The Matrix and in Terminator are based on a concept that's not that far off, that you have to create a bunch of rules that actually have the intended consequences. And there's so many instances where the outcome will be unintended when taken to a self-learning platform. So those are the sort of things that we want to make sure when we kick off anything where there's automation, whether you call it AI or machine learning or whatever it may be, that we really look into, is this data usable and input in a signal? What is our objective? And then are these rules hitting our objective? And then how are we going to continue to have human oversight and maintenance of the decisions to make sure that the result is improving and what we actually intended? And when you're dealing with people's health and a mission that important, you really don't want to get it wrong. You want to make sure you're nailing all of those things.
By the way, before I ask the next question, if you have a question that's at any point, just raise your hand. We don't have to wait to the end. So, okay, we got a question in the back.
Hold up, let me get a mic.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. I can repeat it.
So brand versus performance, accuracy versus scale, business and life and every day, there's a million balanced conversations. What I normally find is that the key is to start out with your North Star metrics and goals and understand where you're going. One is never going to be enough. For me, it's sort of a blend of two always, that one is a hedge of the other to make sure that you're going the right way. So if you just optimize for profit, you could have an 8 ROI, but you probably wanted to spend more, but you're not going to because your goal is to get the highest ROI possible, and you're leaving a lot of business and growth on the table. You can get a lot of scale, and at the same time, if it's not driving the business, if it's not driving the outcomes that you want, just reaching people is nobody's goal. If you reach them, you offend them, they're never going to buy your product, you're not achieving anything that your shareholders, that your business, that your mission is trying to do. So I think whenever we're looking at different variables. I think Obi-Wan Kenobi got it right, that when you deal with extremes, you're going to be in a bad place at the end of the day. And so we try to make sure that we're looking at which place in the balance and the range and the scope is going to get us to our end goal and the furthest towards what we want to go. But if you don't have that North Star, it's just subjective, and it normally is the biggest title in the room in their opinion.
So adding on to that, so you've had some success and failures with personalization AI at Bayer or other places. Can you take us through a success story and then also take us through I don't know if you want to talk about the failure, but I'm going to put you on the spot and see if you have one that you could share.
So I am part of a very big, large global corporation with lawyers on both sides of the Atlantic.
Selling drugs in the middle, too.
Somewhat regulated industry as well. So I'm usually able to actually say more without our own unique examples. But what I will say is that when we buy on automated platforms where you're dealing with billions of impressions, tens, hundreds of billions of auctions where we're buying ads in real time based off of a large number of decision rules, what we have found is that we still, and this should, I think, be something that everyone takes to heart, is that we still every day when we buy do at least 2 or 3 things where we're tricking the buying platform into doing what we want, given the rules that it has in place for itself. And these are the platforms that after 10, 15, 20 years of ad tech are the best at the top. The rest of the stars have fallen away. All day is they have people and engineers and data scientists creating those rules. And those rules still are not getting us what we want at that time as one of the larger ad buyers in the world in a pretty big use case where we work closely with them. So I think when we put that in context, we have a respect for how hard it is, but then we also know that sometimes to be successful and using AI, you need a third-party platform because it's still going to be a much bigger, better data set than we could ever have ourselves. There's going to be a focus in thinking through a lot of the ways of rules that we can never staff up and have that same part of that specialist, but we can leverage them. And sometimes it's going to be leveraging them in a way that is direct and as intended. And sometimes in the short term to get what you need to get done, you need to trick an AI platform to get done what you want to get done. So I think when we've had that view that those platforms aren't perfect, and once you understand the rules, there's a set of rules that they're based on, you become much better at leveraging AI platforms in the short term and the long term to get what you want to get done.
So true. We're one of those platforms that, do human changes. We have 100 billion requests that we come in. We don't send them out equally to all the buy side. And the reason for that is it takes too much bandwidth, too much QPS. So you have to send it to where you do. So instead of sending it to 50 different platforms, you send it to 5 or 6, right? And it's true, and that's not artificial intelligence. That's just knowing where most of the demand comes from, where you have track record and success. And I admit that as a founder of one of the larger in-app platforms, that's something that you have to do. It's an impossibility to send out 100 billion requests to 50 different buying platforms, because that's 50 times the transaction, and you're doing that every millisecond. It's too much. So we had a question back here in the middle.
Here.
Right here.
A couple of questions. I mean, one about the variable that you're trying to optimize, right? You're in healthcare, so I think that, at least I hope that the optimization is not selling more, but improving the health outcomes that you get, right? So question number 1, how you do that. And question number 2, if you can share any learnings during the pandemic. How do you change your approach to personalization and AI during the pandemic?
A couple points here. When I joined Bayer, the mission that I'd be able to be a part of was a huge factor. Pretty niche expertise and skill set that I have. My parents still don't understand what I do. Now I just say I sell drugs, and they they understand selling drugs more than programmatic or automated ad buying. But the meaning of being able to apply what I do to that mission even became larger during the pandemic. And my best friend growing up is head of orthopedic surgery at Montefiore, and a lot of late night conversations as the hospital system and healthcare system was about to be overwhelmed in what they were dealing with. And so with our over-the-counter products in general, we do know that the more adoption of self-care there is, the less of a stress on the healthcare system that we are providing. And overall, we are providing better health outcomes with whether that is vitamins and nutrients, whether that is pain relief, an anti-inflammatory that if you let it go and persist can have long-term negative effects. So we do believe that adoption and penetration of the products and portfolio that we've determined to own and operate inherently is going to impact the issue is adoption and usage and understanding of when and how to use it. So message association and retention, education about that is definitely a priority as well. But we are definitely seeing is this increasing usage of these products, and particularly in locations and segments of the population where that's been a particular issue.
So, Paul, there's things like CCPA, GDPR that makes it very hard to reach the actual right consumer, especially then when you put healthcare on top of it. But you have products that can save people's lives, right? How do you balance, right? So you can't retarget consumers that walked into a cancer center, right? Like that's not something you can do. But in some ways, it could be the right thing to do because it could be information that you're getting to a consumer. So how do you balance that?
So I think we always look at ideas and opportunities as, can this output and outcome serve that mission and be beneficial not just to Bayer, but externalities in the community as well. We have plenty of lawyers as well to then dive in, as well as I think a very strong executive team that is practical but making the right sort of decisions. I do think we've hired, and I'm fortunate to have a team that is exceptional and brilliant. And so in a lot of ways, we've been able to find a number of strong signals and ways to segment and target and reach people in the right way that has had a huge impact on the business that we don't necessarily need to just go that route. There are numerous ways to get anything done and do any path. And I think we found a way where we've been able to, with leadership support, align talent, the technology stack that we put in place, the way that we do things. And when you have all three of those aligned and in sync and not in conflict, then you wind up being able to execute a lot better, where there might be some sort of one-off tactic or situation, and yes, it might be on that gray line, but you don't have to touch it because there's so many more opportunities when you're functioning and executing that well. And I do think that's one of the keys in AI is one, having the right culture and the right collaboration across business units and data sets and stakeholders to really make sure that you're making decisions and rules and data inputs that are right. But that, again, it's not a checkbox for we don't necessarily have to execute or do this ourselves, but that it is about execution. Just what you're doing in that execution is going to be much different than the manual work that you did before.
So we do have one more question, but I can't help myself. I got to ask because you just said it. You said the path that works. What does that look like for you? What does it look like where it works? Without giving away, obviously, the secret ingredients, but what can you share here? What that exactly, when it looks right, it works at scale, and you do it over and over and over.
Well, we are hiring, so you can get more details if you come and work and join the team.
That's why I had to ask there. I didn't.
Off stage, you'll know every detail at that point. For us, if we are if we are driving and growing the adoption of these products in a way that is sound fundamentally from a business perspective, so that we still have to drive a profit. You can't lose money indefinitely. I think as many companies now are seeing that we're high growth and losing money, and they're definitely seeing the results of that is it's not sustainable long term. So we want to make sure that anything that we do, it could be right and morally right, but if you get it so that it makes business sense, it's going to be sustainable and the ability to execute at a scale. So we want to make sure that what we're doing is profitable and is growing the penetration, the adoption, and each of our brands' businesses along the way. And we know if we're doing that, this is a product that's going to deliver that mission. So if we don't do that, then what we're doing is even if we have short-term gains, they're not going to be in a sound foundation. So we try to test and learn a lot. We always have a testing roadmap. We always are trying to question our assumptions and do better. But we truly believe that if we build a foundation on things that are having a good impact that also make business sense and are going to drive the bottom line so that we can invest more over a long period of time, that's the best long-term output on all sides.
Okay, let's go to the question.
Hey, Paul. Mike Mammarella. How you doing? Yeah, long time. I thought you made a great point a couple of comments back really about how you use AI and how you try to force the system to do what you want because the human eyes and the human intelligence is better than the AI to some extent, right? Couldn't agree with that more. Great comment. I was curious if you could provide some examples of things that you're trying to do to cheat the system.
So one of our big interview questions, or my big interview questions, is always name a small nuance that you have experienced or figured out in an ad buying platform that just has a huge outsized impact on that campaign. Every buying platform from Facebook to Amazon to Trade Desk has it. And so that is sort of the secret sauce of how we do a lot of what we do. But you could think about if there's a buying platform that is intended to maximize ad spend that's going through it. If you reduce your spend, it thinks that it's not working, and it will make changes to prioritize you. If you are increasing spend, they think that it's working more than enough, and they may do things to deprioritize you. And that would seem counterintuitive. But if you understand how the rules of those platforms, how they make those decisions, you understand how to trick it because you know their goal. And so it's almost like Plinko and The Price is Right, where you're dropping it and you know how it gets to the end of the thing. And that's really how we like it. Whenever we make a change and we're lever pulling active ad buyers, and we always isolate variables when we try something different, and we see the result, we always have that conversation of why, what made it happen, and then how do we do what we want to do? How do we get to what we want to do, knowing that the rules is going to treat our actions this way? And a lot of our job is then explaining to the rest of the organization something that sounds completely bizarre, counterintuitive, and made up, but in ways that they kind of understand that those are the rules, and we're getting to your objective and the bear's objective at the end of the day.
So one thing to put in perspective here, what Paul's talking about is, so if you're the brand that's leveraging a platform to make a buy across, whatever it is, CTV, mobile, digital out of home, audio, blah, 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 right? And then the auction happens, and then it returns back who the winner is. That all happens in 150 milliseconds or less. That's the KPI in the entire ad tech ecosystem. So there is, in terms of tricking the system, that's one of the reasons. There isn't this time to really fast figure out all the details and these platforms. So I just want to put a little perspective on, why sometimes. And why, honestly, I think you're going to see companies that figure these nuances out. There will be, in the future, and we'll talk about the future in a second, that will gain significant market share because of those nuances. So let's talk a little bit about the future. You said you're hiring. You've had obviously a lot of success. You've had some you've had some bumps in the road. Where are you taking personalization and AI at Bayer?
So I do think that beyond personalization, that the supply chain has a significant impact that's going to reverberate in a number of ways that we've just started to see. One, I do believe that marketing and the efficiency and the ability to leverage it for efficiency and growth, as we've done with cheap supply and manufacturing operations for decades, it's going to be more of a marketing execution. But in order to do that well, I think there's going to be more integration of data sets with your business, your product supply, what's available, that pricing in your decision making for ads. And those have been siloed data sets. And people who speak completely different languages, you would not sit them at the same table at a wedding, but they're going to have to come together in a pool and understand each side of the business and how they relate. And a lot of the decision engines and AI that's being built around business operations and getting that supply through Amazon's warehouses, whatever it may be, and how you buy ads are going to have to talk to each other in a lot of ways that they haven't before. And that's going to take a lot of people and relationship building and trust and learning and understanding. So I think that is going to be probably one of the biggest areas in the future for AI. I think the second thing is that we're going to uncover opportunities we didn't know existed that went against every assumption and bias and things you've been reading in trades. And what will be key is, can you get beyond your bias and when you hear what you don't want to hear? I think a lot of marketers have said, I know 50% of my media is working, I just don't know what it is. I think there's a lot of marketers that if they knew what 50% were working, would be very upset and would mentally block and separate themselves from the right decision and what the data is actually telling them. So I think from a marketer perspective, we're going to identify opportunities and it'll come faster than we know why. And it's going to be about, one, getting beyond your biases, and then two, being able to say, is this negative? And should I not be doing this? And as long as it's not a negative, of continuing to do it while you figure out the why. Because in order to keep pace and compete, there'll be others that are doing that. And we saw this in finance as well with automated stock buying and hedge funds and high frequency. They understood trades that were happening that would be profitable before they understood why that was going to be profitable, why that trade was working. And if you weren't doing that, you were a step behind. So it's being able to work in the gray and to work fast and be agile and collaborate, and all those are going to be really important people skills in addition to data science skills.
So when talking about personalization and AI and media, right? We've talked a lot about media. We have to talk about Apple and Google. I mean, that's, Apple's obviously, Apple and Mozilla for Firefox literally got rid of the third-party cookies, right? Apple changed their IDFA, which is a mobile ID, if you don't know what that is, from an opt-out to an opt-in, method. How has that impacted your business? Do you think that would, I have so many questions on this. First of all, before we talk about your business, what did you think of those changes for Apple? We'll eventually get to Google.
I'm not going to comment on those changes much for Apple, but to say that I do believe that that targeted advertising is essential for small businesses and competition, and has numerous benefits to society from jobs, and without it, it's actually more beneficial to the largest tech and business giants in the world, and we're a pretty big business. And I know for a fact that as an upstart and a small, let alone a restaurant or a local business, would have no ability to do what we do without how ads have been being bought today. And so I think some of the discussion can get to the extremes without understanding that nuance and what's good and what's bad. I will say, fortunate to have trust from 2017, 18, 4-year plan from technical knowledge of having worked at every part of the ad tech stack on how to hedge ourselves and protect ourselves against any loss from the third-party cookie. And so Firefox, Safari, ATT have all happened, and we've been able to continue to scale, continue to have our ads perform, continue to buy audiences. And I think the match rates are going to go down, and how you do it is going to evolve, but there's still going to be the ability to do audience targeting given how things are. And I do think generally that it is a very good thing in terms of the positive impact that it can have. But again, that is one of our special sauces, and even how we did and chose and planned to do things, we have adjusted that with the talent that we've had and what we've learned, but we've not had any major disruption to how we buy, nor do we foresee any disruption to our ability to, at scale, reach the people and drive those outputs that we want.
I'd love to keep talking about this, but we're going to get the hook.
I need to have it programmed so that the Oscar music comes on automatically.
I know. It said we got the
Next time.
the creep walk. So, one thing we'll just say before, just from all brand marketers out there, if you don't know this, I'm sure you know this, at running one of the larger in-app ecosystems, buyers are spending 2x the amount on Android users as they are iOS users. I'm an iOS user, so I'm a little offended, but that's what's happening in the market. And to your point, you need to make adjustments because there's opportunities. Google's eventually going to make a change. Obviously, I don't like what Apple did, so we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, for your time and questions, and feel free to reach out after or to me.